And the President of the United States made another important announcement today, one that he was deploying National Guard troops to the streets of Washington, D.C. The city's police force is also set to come under federal government management. Trump says the aim is to deal with what he calls the city's wave of lawlessness. Critics, however, point to statistics indicating that violent crime is at its lowest in years. Washington is not part of a U.S. state and has its own rules governing its security structures.
Wow.
Donald Trump is taking an unprecedented step to seize control of the U.S. Capitol, part of his campaign promise to be a law and order president. The Republican leader said he was formally declaring a public safety emergency, claiming that Washington is out of control.
Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
Trump said law enforcement will crack down on crime and target homeless people, though he did not provide details on how or where homeless people would be moved. Some D.C. residents are pushing back. Dozens gathered in downtown Washington to protest against the federal takeover of local law enforcement.
I've lived here 50 years, and it's a safe place. I raised my children here. It's a safe place. We're safer when we know our neighbors, including people who are homeless, and when we develop respectful relationships. That's what I believe.
But others consider Trump's move to be a necessity and are welcoming it.
The police in D.C. have tried to do their best, but, if they've got bad leadership, and if the judges are releasing so many people so quickly. I live in Fairfax County, although I've lived in D.C. for years. In Fairfax County, the judges are releasing child offenders on that day and not turning them over to ICE, and so ICE has to go chase people around. So I'm totally in support of law enforcement. Really needs to be strong here in the city.
Trump has not provided a timeline for the control of the police department, but he's limited to 30 days. After that, he needs congressional approval.
I'm now joined by Richard Painter. He's a professor of corporate law and served as the chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. Richard, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So why exactly is sending the National Guard to Washington suddenly at the top of Trump's agenda?
Well, I can't guess why the president makes his political decisions, but I do think that crime in major cities in the United States, including the District of Columbia, is a very, very serious problem, has been for quite some time. And there are now a number of explanations for that. We have very permissive gun laws in the United States, very easy for anybody, including crazy people and gangs, to get guns. Our police forces are not adequately staffed in many cities, and some of the prosecutors aren't prosecuting crimes the way they should be. So there is a legitimate federal role in law enforcement, particularly in our nation's capital. But bring in the National Guard or the Army, that's an entirely different matter, and that's prohibited under the Posse Comitatus Act that was passed after the Civil War, and that's not allowed except for in very, very few circumstances. And I don't think any of those circumstances exist here. So yes, some limited, enroll with the FBI and other federal law enforcement is contemplated under the legal structure we have, and District of Columbia, yes, has a unique governance structure, and the president temporarily can take over the police department if he thinks that's what he needs to do. But bringing in the Army and the National Guard under the president's command is beyond, I believe, what President Trump is allowed to do under U.S. law.
All right. Now, Washington's Mayor Muriel Bowser called Trump's actions, quote, unsettling and unprecedented, but said there wasn't much she could do. So legally, are her hands really tied in this matter?
Well, this depends on whether President Trump does bring in the National Guard or the Army. If he brings in the military, and that includes the National Guard under the president's command, then that would be in violation of U.S. law, the Posse Comitatus Act, and I don't think that the president is going to be able to show the very few exceptions that would allow that. For example, an insurrection or that the National Guard is simply being used in aid of a specific federal law enforcement mission. So we're going to see what the president actually does here. But the use of the military for domestic law enforcement in the United States is illegal. The president cannot do it except for in very, very few circumstances. So we're going to have to see where this goes as to whether President Trump is going to find himself in court. He's already been sued by the governor of California for deployment of the Marines and the National Guard in Los Angeles. And that case is going to be going to trial very, very soon.
Now, beyond the legal considerations, D.C. Mayor has also warned that deploying the National Guard could erode Washington residents' trust in the police forces. Do you share that concern?
I believe that bringing in the military for domestic law enforcement is a potentially very dangerous step. And there's a big difference between the police force and the military. We have enough, we have extremists who attack the police and say we should defund the police, abolish the police, and all that type of rhetoric. And we obviously have to push back on that. We need to expand our police forces and have more effective policing in big cities, including the District of Columbia. But to bring the police in together with the military is a very bad idea, and it is also illegal under federal law, and that's for a good reason. The countries that have tried using the military for domestic law enforcement have found that that's a slippery slope that can end with dictatorship, and that's not what we want to do in the United States.
No, that's actually a point I'd like to dock onto, if I could, for a second. Compared to previous administrations, this seems to be a massive expansion of federal power. What kind of message does it send?
We certainly have a very, very aggressive assertion of presidential power in other administrations. The difference here is the threat to use the military, the Army, the National Guard, under the president's command for domestic law enforcement purposes. This is unprecedented. We haven't had it since the Civil War, when the South of the United States was occupied by the Union Army. And potentially this could be very dangerous. And other countries have tried this, allowing the military to enforce domestic law for domestic law enforcement, have found it's a very slippery slope that could end in dictatorship. It happened in Germany in 1932 during the Weimar Republic with the famous the Reich versus Prussia case, where the president and the chancellor wanted to send in troops to Prussia despite the objections of the government of Prussia. And the German Supreme Court allowed that to happen in 1932 in a constitutional republic. And only 1 year later, that same type of argument was used to send the federal troops all over the country and turn the country into a dictatorship. This is a very dangerous move to use the military for domestic law enforcement. We don't want it happening in the United States, and most democracies don't want it happening there either, because it can lead down a very, very dark path.
All right. These are some truly concerning developments out of the United States. That was Richard Painter, professor of corporate law and former chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. Thank you very much for your expertise.
Well, thank you.